Hi, welcome to the Brain Salad Surgery Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Joe DeBellis. Today, we're going to talk about cats, love, and quantum superposition, all embodied in the story of Nobel Prize-winning physicist, philosopher, and notorious womanizer, Erwin Schrödinger. But his legacy isn't just about groundbreaking physics and a long list of lovers. It's about a cat, Schrödinger's cat. A thought experiment so famous it escaped the world of quantum physics and earned a place in pop culture. Now, while some of you may not be familiar, many have seen countless memes on social media referring to Schrödinger's famous thought experiment. It's important to point out now, and this is very, 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 very important to all the animal lovers out there, that a thought experiment is exactly that, one carried out in the mind, not reality. So I just want to assure you that no cats were murdered in the process of the experiment, nor for the purposes of this video. The cat is placed in a box, and in the box, it's sealed with a tiny pellet of radioactive material and a vial of poisonous gas. There's a 50-50 chance that the material decays in an hour. And if it decays, then the poison is released and the cat dies. If it doesn't decay, the cat lives. If you're not familiar with radioactive decay, you can also think of the pellet as a coin flipped in the air and in a state of constant motion, spinning in the air, neither heads nor tails, with a 50-50 chance of landing either way. If it lands heads, let's say the poison is released and the cat dies. And if it lands tails, let's say the cat lives. Now, until you open the box, quantum physics says that the pellet is both decayed and not decayed. The coin, by analogy, is both heads and tails at the same time until it lands when the door is opened, which means the cat is both dead and alive at the same time. That's quantum superposition, reality holding two opposing truths until it is observed. Now, this has been proven and demonstrated in the laboratory over and over and over again, and it's known as the observation effect or collapse of the wave function. Two catchphrases that every manifesting influencer bankrolls their next trip to Bali with. But in the context of quantum physics, superposition is the cornerstone of the very essence of quantum physics, and Schrödinger's cat's face is carved on it. Now, Schrödinger was born in Vienna in 1887, and he grew up privileged among a family of intellectuals, surrounded by books and science and polite society. But beneath that well-mannered exterior was a man who couldn't resist breaking the rules in physics and in love. But we'll get to the love part a bit later. By the 1920s, Schrödinger had rewritten the laws of nature. He created the equation that describes how everything from atoms to stars move and change. His thought experiment is at the heart of the quantum world, and this is the ultimate irony of this cat paradox. Because here's the thing, Schrödinger wasn't trying to define quantum physics, he was actually mocking it. In Schrödinger's era, physics wasn't just chalk and equations carried out by pipe-smoking nerds. It was a to-the-death knife fight over the nature of reality itself. On one side, there were classical physicists like Albert Einstein as their spiritual leader, and to them, the universe was elegant and predictable, behaving with clockwork-like precision. If you knew where everything started, you could predict where everything would end. Einstein believed reality existed, whether anybody was looking or not. He once joked, "I like to think the moon is there even when I'm not looking at it." To Einstein, uncertainty wasn't mystical. Uncertainty was an incomplete model or just ignorance. On the other side was crazy Danish physicist Niels Bohr and his group of radicals out of Copenhagen. Their theories were known as the Copenhagen interpretation, and they were shocking. Their beliefs shook the field of physics. At a quantum level, things don't have definite properties until you measure them. If Einstein was the conductor of the New York Philharmonic, then Niels Bohr and the Copenhagen gang were Sid Vicious and the Sex Pistols. Bohr was basically saying, stop asking the electron what it's really doing. That question doesn't mean anything. Einstein hated that. And of course, Bohr loved that Einstein hated it because they were always butting heads. Now, into this philosophical cage match strolls Erwin Schrödinger. elegant, sarcastic, ever the provocateur. Schrödinger thought Bohr's version of quantum reality was absurd. So he invented the most famous academic insult in history, a cat that is simultaneously alive and dead. He was mocking the Copenhagen interpretation and waving a big middle finger at Niels Bohr. Schrödinger thought his paradox would humiliate Bohr. Instead, it became the defining symbol of quantum weirdness. Einstein kept insisting reality was there, like the moon, even when unobserved. He would famously say to Bohr, "God does not play dice." To which Bohr smiled and replied, "Stop telling God what to do." Bohr said reality doesn't exist until you measure it. Schrödinger said, "Cool story, Niels. Now here's a dead cat." Schrödinger tried to mock them, but he ended up accidentally immortalizing them. And the cat walked off with the meme. He thought their version of quantum theory, that particles exist in these ghostly maybes until you actually observe them, was pure nonsense. He just couldn't comprehend it, as couldn't most of the classical physical community. Yet Bohr stuck with it and endured, just like the cat. In another twist of irony, it's Albert Einstein, ironically not Niels Bohr, who is most commonly thought of as the person when people think of quantum theory. But that's another story for another time in another episode. And so in one of the great ironies of science and life, Erwin Schrödinger's imaginary cat didn't end up undermining superposition. It became the symbol of it. The joke outlived the joker. So let's talk a little bit about Schrödinger, the man, not the cat. And while he was calculating wave function by day, he was being very naughty and, let's say, conducting other experiments by night. Everybody knows him for quantum physics, the equations, the uncertainty, the box, the cat that's dead and not dead. But the guy didn't just theorize superposition, he lived it. He was married to a woman named Annie. She was smart, loyal, and emotionally steady, a grounding force in his life. And she stayed with him as his wife for 42 years, right until the end when he died in 1961. Their marriage was unconventional and strained, but not broken. Annie knew about his affairs and largely accepted them. Historians describe their dynamic less like betrayal and more like negotiated emotional ecosystem. One biography summarized it bluntly by saying, "Annie was the constant and the others were the weather." He also fell in love with Hilda March, the wife of a friend and colleague, and had a child with her. And then, while he was working in Dublin, he fell in love again with Sheila May and had another child. And nobody was hiding. No dramatic cloak and dagger. They all basically knew about each other. His heart wasn't a love triangle. It was a tesseract in 4 dimensions. He once wrote, "My work is the product of erotic tension." Fair to say the man found inspiration wherever he could find a pulse. He wasn't mocking physics. He was describing himself. He believed sexuality was not a distraction from his genius, but a source of energy for it. Honestly, that's how Schrödinger lived. That's how he rolled. Faithful and unfaithful. Devoted scientist, hopeless romantic. Alive and dead to consequences all at once. His wife, his lovers, and the strange paradoxical loyalty that he ran through his personal life was the very embodiment of the theory of superposition that he tried so desperately to undermine. The paradox, loyal and unfaithful at the same time. He didn't hide who he was. He didn't compartmentalize. He lived in emotional superposition, fiercely devoted to Annie as his life partner, openly unable to confine his romantic and erotic life to one person. Deep attachment to multiple women simultaneously, emotionally, and intellectually. Unlike typical infidelity stories that involve secrecy, Schrödinger's relationships were almost open source emotional physics. Wife, lovers, children from different mothers, all orbiting the same sun, none entirely eclipsed. He gave us the cat that was both dead and alive, and a life that was both genius and chaos. And if you can imagine for your own thought experiment, were you to strip away the morality, the karma, or judgment of any kind, and just be the observer, be the watcher, as Eckhart Tolle calls it, is we can watch an imaginary cat be killed by poisonous gas in the name of science. Let's look inward for a moment and observe the duality of human nature. What does it say about us, about the parts of ourselves that can hold two truths at once, that we can be sure and uncertain, devoted and distracted, hopeful and afraid, all before breakfast? The man who rewrote reality but couldn't quite manage his own. You can imagine him as a sort of man who drank thoughtfully a glass of Austrian red wine while sitting elegantly outside a Viennese cafe, arguing metaphysics or flirting with somebody else's wife. Maybe it means the human condition is just one big wave function, and every choice we make collapses the universe into who we are right now in the perfect present. So yeah, we'll start with a cat in a box, but by the end we might find ourselves in there too, right along with the cat. We all live in superposition between who we are and who we're afraid to be seen as, between the life we calculate and the one that happens when someone finally opens the box. He didn't live despite the contradiction. He lived because of it. A physicist who dismantled certainties in science, a man who dismantled certainties in love, a life lived in overlapping states, unresolved, uncollapsed. Schrödinger wasn't questioning reality, he was living it. One wife, multiple muses, zero hesitation. Was he loyal? Yes. Was he faithful? Also yes. Technically, but kind of like in layers. He didn't cheat the system, he expanded the system. A relationship multiverse. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Erwin Schrödinger. How you get quantum physics and quantum romance from the same genius brain. If Schrödinger were on a dating app, his status wouldn't be single. It wouldn't be married. It wouldn't be it's complicated. It would be yes. Just yes. We all live in superposition. So if you ever felt conflicted, divided, uncertain, congratulations. You're quantum, baby. And remember, for a guy like Schrödinger, even a guy who discovered how the universe really works couldn't quite figure out love. So you're in good company. Now, this is a red from Burgenland, a region of Austria. It was Schrödinger's favorite area, and he would enjoy a small red glass every night. You know, if Schrödinger walked into your kitchen, he'd pour himself a small glass of red wine. He'd admire the aesthetics before the food, flirt without being vulgar, argue physics like poetry, ask a question that ruins your certainty, and leave you thinking long after he left. Schrödinger wasn't a contradiction. He was a harmonized paradox, a gentleman, a lover, a rebel, a poet with a physics problem, or maybe a physicist with a poetry problem. And there's one last mystery before we go. Why a cat? Why not a dog, a rat, a mouse, a bird, a cat? Well, I have my theory. And that's that Schrödinger was a man of many interests, but he clearly had a lifelong appreciation for the feminine, feline elegance. So here's to pussycats. And that's where we're going to leave it for today. Thank you for joining me at the Brain Salad Surgery Podcast, where every episode is food for thought and sometimes a glass of wine.